it play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and I am happy to announce the beginning of our 8th edition Warhammer 40k coverage, starting with this video, which will be an overview of the changes from 7th to 8th edition. We've got the new Dark Imperium box right here, and all of the rest of the rules. We've been playing like crazy. We've already recorded, by the end of this, by the time you're watching this, we'll have recorded, I think, 11 battle reports, just for you guys to enjoy over the next couple of weeks. The pre-order has started now on June 3rd, so you can actually pre-order from your local store or from the Games Workshop website or from the Games Workshop store. And for the next 2 weeks during the pre-order time, we're going to hopefully be putting out 40k videos every single day, excluding Sundays. And every day we should have new reviews of the different factions, new battle reports of the different factions, and other review type videos and other battle report type videos for you as well. Today we have a special treat for you. First off is this two-part review. In this first part I'm going to cover the basic changes in going from 7th to 8th edition. And the second part, I'm going to actually go around to all 4 of our studios while everybody is playing their games. And that's right, all 4 studios today will be in use, people playing 8th edition 40k. And I'm going to talk to each of the employees and each of our guests about what they think about 8th edition, so you can get their different viewpoints of the different factions, just an overview. There's a ton to cover. There is no way that I'm going to be able to give you a review of everything that has come out. And so we're going to just try to focus on certain areas to give you an idea of how everything works. Also, as much as I'm going to go over all the phases in this video, I am not really making a how to play 8th edition right now. We're going to wait till later once we have a lot more games under our belt. This one's more to give you a general feel for how 8th edition works and how it's different from 7th edition. Also, today, right now, we have 2 battle reports that we have released. The first one, which is free on YouTube, is a game between Chaos versus Tyranids, the old grudge match, Dave playing the Chaos, and me playing the Tyranids. And so you can go and check out that one. And then for our Vault members, we have another game, which will be Grey Knights versus Necrons. So we're going to have links to everything in the video description below, both to the second part of this review for our Vault members and to both of the battle reports that are today. And then we're going to have tons of content, probably more than you can possibly keep up with. So just pick the factions that you like the most and watch those videos, or if you really want to binge watch everything, do that. So first off, we're going to start taking a look at the different things that this game now has to offer. Before I go into the phases though, these are the books that you're going to need. Now thankfully, the Dark Imperium box set actually comes with a full hardcover book. It doesn't come with a mini rule book. We don't know yet if they're going to make a mini rule book, but this has all the rules you need. Now it looks thick, but like Age of Sigmar, the game has actually been simplified is the right word, I think, but not in a bad way, not the negative connotation that simplified might bring, to not very many pages of rules in here. Most of the rules have been pushed into the data slates for each of the models. Personally, I would have appreciated if some of the common rules between everything was all in the rule book as universal special rules. It'd make things a little less kind of convoluted. For example, many things have what's equivalent to a deep strike rule, but they're all called different things. Some of them are hidden deployment, some of them are aerial assault, some of them are you can put a guy in a manta, but they all do exactly the same thing. And so to me, that would have been better as a universal rule, so that way people know when I say, well, I can deep strike, or I can whatever you want to call it, that we all understand what that means. Instead, we have to make sure we read that rule, make sure it's worded exactly the same way as everybody else. So we could have used universal special rules in here, but they decided not to do that. They decided to go the Age of Sigmar route and include everything on the data slates. That does have the advantage of letting them update the data slates a lot easier if they want a specific unit to act differently. But at the same time, they could just put an exception into their entry. So this has everything that you need to play without the actual armies. So it has 3 types of play: open play, narrative play, and match play. If you are an Age of Sigmar player, everything you are about to see in this video is going to feel very familiar. In fact, I would wager a bet that basically what they did was they took the Age of Sigmar rules and what they learned from that, improved on it, and that's how they made 40k, because everything really does work a lot like Age of Sigmar. And that is not a bad thing, because it is awesome. I've already played a bunch of games and I am loving it. So in open play, you kind of play however you want. Narrative play, there's special scenarios and special scenario modifiers. And in match play, they introduce rules to kind of mitigate some of the spamming and some of the problems that might come in from competitive play. So they put kind of a set of guidelines out for numbers of detachments and how many things can go into reserve and how many psychic powers you can use and things like that. So they do a really good job, like the General's Handbook for Age of Sigmar, of giving you various ways to play the actual game. The next thing you're going to need besides this book, which is in the Dark Imperium box set right now, are these books. Once again, Age of Sigmar players are going to find this very familiar. All of the current armies from 7th edition 40k are now contained within these 5 books. We have Imperium 1, Imperium 2, Chaos, Xenos 1, and my personal favorite, Xenos 2. It contains the Tyranids and the Genestealer cult. Now, that doesn't mean, I don't want anybody to think that they've done like what they did in Age of Sigmar and grouped all these together in destruction and all these different things. Like Xenos 2, it says Orcs, Tau, Tyranids, and Genestealer cult. They're not combined into one army at all. It's just this book is a compendium of the rules for all 4 of these. Orcs still can't join Tyranids and that kind of stuff. Although Tyranids and Genestealer cult can work a lot closer together now than they could before. More on that later. It's just the fact that they needed to update all the rules, all the old codexes are gone, and so this is the way that they did it. And I would also I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a stopgap, it's something just to fill in the blanks until they actually start updating the armies, much like they did with Age of Sigmar. So as you read through all of these, as you see us playing them, remember that they'll all probably get their own books eventually that will give them more details and will give them the complexity that you're looking for, because they have done a lot of simplification to all of the armies in ways that I actually really, really enjoy. So make sure you get the books that you need for your army and also the rule book. Now, let's go in to the rules. I'm not going to be showing you everything in the book, but I am going to be going through the different phases. The core rules teach you that units must stay in coherency. That's 2 inches horizontally and 6 inches vertically. And it tells you about the phases of the game. It's a movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, charge phase, fight phase, and the morale phase. That's 1 player turn, and then the other player has their turn. Now, unlike Age of Sigmar, you don't have a chance to go twice. Basically, once you know who's going first, you alternate turns. 2 player turns is 1 game round, and so you don't have to worry about somebody going twice. I know when I heard that's how Age of Sigmar worked, and I know other people don't like that. Well, they didn't bring that into 40k. You just do your turn, and then your opponent does their turn, and so on and so forth. Starting with the movement phase, which of course is the first phase, you basically get to move each of your units as far as they're able to move. That hasn't changed much. What has changed is every unit now has a movement value, which actually makes a huge difference to how the game plays. For example, these Termagants have a move value of 6 inches. Genestealers, on the other hand, and Hormagaunts, have a move value of 8 inches. Having that difference really makes you feel the difference of how fast each of the units are. Also, shooting or running is not a thing anymore. You actually do that all in the movement phase. It's called an advance now. It's not called running. And there's a good reason for that, because advancing works different than running. You roll a die and you add that to your movement. So for example, if these Termagants wanted to move, they move 6 inches plus 5. So they could move at a total of 11 inches. Now that sounds very similar to how 7th edition worked, but it does prevent them from doing certain things like firing rapid fire or heavy weapons or pistols, but it doesn't stop them from firing assault weapons. But they do get a -1 to hit modifier when they're firing assault weapons after they advanced. So having assault weapons allows you to really get close and personal with your opponent. Advancing does stop you from charging, however, unless you have some exception to the rule, like Genestealers do. They're actually allowed to advance and charge. So you think about it, all of a sudden Genestealers have an 8-inch move, they can go an extra d6 inches, and they can still charge up to 2d6 inches. And charging even works a little different, which we'll get into when we get to the charge phase. So all of a sudden, close combat is actually a lot deadlier, and I have been testing it out, and I have found that to be the case. Also, you get different movement values for these things. A lot of things have the fly special rule, whereas before they'd have jump or jet, or they'd be flyers or hover or skimmers or things like that. The fly special rule allows you to move over intervening models and terrain, and it allows you to go to the upper levels of ruins where normally you might not be able to. For example, Assault Marines could move just over their guys if they wanted to, and that makes a big difference for how far they can move. So interestingly enough, we have different move values for these. We have 6 inches for the tacticals. We've got 12 inches for the assault squad with jump packs. Assault squads without jump packs are only 6-inch move and they don't have fly. Now that might sound the same as before, and well, it is. They move 12 inches before. Rhinos have a straight up move characteristic of 12 inches until they're damaged, but we'll talk about that in a second. And over here we have an attack bike. It actually has a move value of 14 inches along with all the other bikes as well. On top of that, he has a turbo boost special rule that when he advances, he goes an extra 6 inches on top of the D6 inches that he does. So I know bikes were fast before, but they definitely feel a lot faster now, especially knowing that you can still fire assault weapons after you have advanced, which might make a difference for the kind of weapons that you decide to equip them with. On top of that, you have to think differently about vehicles now. One piece of advice that I could give anybody trying out 8th edition for the first time, forget everything you know about 7th edition. It's just going to confuse you because while things do look and feel similar, they really aren't that similar. I'd say there's very few similarities to it. They look and smell and taste the same, but they aren't actually the same. For example, this Hive Tyrant over here is a monstrous creature. And that no longer exists. Now he just has the monster keyword. When you give him wings, his movement value goes from 9 inches to 16 inches, and he gains the fly keyword, which allows him to pass over other models and intervening terrain. So all of a sudden, he moves 16 inches, just like that. Now, I know before he could move, if he was in swooping mode, he could move 12 to 24 inches, but he couldn't charge after that. Well, now there's no difference for flying monstrous creatures between swooping and gliding. They just have a nice high move value. So he moves 16 inches, and all of a sudden he's able to charge. And on top of that, he never gets into the sky in such a way that people can't charge him, because there just isn't these flying monstrous creature rules anymore. There's not even really flyer rules. Although most flyers do have rules such as hard to hit, which is -1 to hit them, and also that they can only be charged by other things with the fly keyword. All of a sudden, Assault Marines can charge flyers. So just the whole meta of the game is going to change. Flying Hive Tyrants, which used to be always Daka Tyrants, which they'll still be great at doing, can now actually be really good in close combat as well, given that they can move 16 inches. There's even a psychic power that the Tyranids know that allows them to advance and charge. So if he can successfully get that off, he can move 16 plus D6 and still charge, making him brutally effective in close combat, especially with the way the charges are going to be working. And vehicles, they have done what I've always wanted them to do. They've basically gotten rid of vehicle rules. They're just a model like anything else. They have a strength, they have a toughness, they have wounds, and they have armor saves, they have weapon skills and ballistic skills, so they can charge into combat like everybody else. Sometimes that feels weird, but you kind of have to picture them just ramming into the combat to do some damage. And they do have what Age of Sigmar does to monsters, and the monsters do too, that once they've lost so many wounds, then some of their stats change. For example, with the Rhino, once he's lost half of his wounds, and pretty much all of them it's half their wounds, his movement value goes down, and his ballistic skill goes down. For a Flying Hive Tyrant, his movement skill would go, or his movement value would go down, and also the weapon skill and ballistic skill of his attacks will be hurt as well. And there's usually, as far as I've seen so far, there's 3 levels. There's at fine health, there's at partial health, and there's at really low health that they suffer even more damage. And so vehicles and monsters work the same way. Although monsters have the monster keyword and vehicles have the vehicle keyword, which will affect their interaction with certain words. Unfortunately, I don't know why they did this, but riptides are still monsters. That is a pet peeve of mine. They are clearly vehicles. The reason that that's a big deal is because things that used to have the haywire rule now have other rules that interact with things with the vehicle keyword, and for some reason riptides are still not vehicles. I don't know why they didn't fix that, because I know they made them monstrous creatures and Dread Knights and stuff because they liked the rules of monstrous creatures for them, and I know that makes sense because I like the rules for monstrous creatures for vehicles too, but for some reason they didn't fix that when they came into this new edition. So I am disappointed by that. But overall, I'm satiated by the fact that vehicles now work just like everybody else. We'll talk about transports in a second as well. So movement phase, we can do all this. Other cool things that you can do in the movement phase, you can fall back. So for example, let's say in my turn, the Flying Hive Tyrant jumps up, he charges into these Marines, and after all is said and done, I kill a couple Marines, and these ones are locked in with him. Now let's say you had some really good vehicle killer back here, like a Vindicator. Yes, Vindicators are now good monsters and vehicle killers with the new rules. But now I'm locked in combat. In 7th edition, that was a viable tactic, that if I could get myself locked in combat, you could not shoot at me. Well, now in the movement phase, these guys can just fall back. All a fallback is a regular move, no advancing allowed, that gets you, you have to move and get at least an inch away from all enemy models. I don't get a free strike, I don't get to follow up, I don't get to consolidate, I just stay there all dumbfounded, like saying, why are these guys walking away from me? And then in the shooting phase, everybody can shoot at me. Now guys who fall back can't advance, they can't shoot, and they can't charge. So it does, unless they have the fly keyword. If you have the fly keyword like these guys, they can actually fall back and they can still shoot, but they still can't advance or charge. So even though they've managed to pick apart your Hive Tyrant because he's now out in the open, you still do have the advantage of stopping whatever you charge from shooting that turn. But you're no longer safe in combat. You can no longer hide in combat. And armies like Tau, who have a lot of fly with their battle suits, and other armies like Imperial Guard, who can throw lots of bodies out front and not care about them, let them fall back. And even the Imperial Guard having one of their orders that lets a unit shoot even though they fell back. There's all sorts of new tactics that you're going to have to wrap your mind around, because otherwise, if you get stuck in the 7th edition mindset, somebody else who learns these new rules and learns the tactics, they're going to beat you every single time because they're going to understand the positioning more than you. Other things to think about with movement is that heavy weapons aren't quite as restrictive as they used to be. In 7th edition, you moved a heavy weapon, your ballistic skill was 6+. You have to think of it that way. There's no longer ballistic skills of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's now ballistic skills of 2+, 3+, 4+, 5+, 6+. Now with heavy weapons, you move it, he gets -1 to hit. So Space Marine normally hits on a 3, move the heavy weapon, he can shoot on a 4. Now if he advances, he can't shoot at all. Only assault weapons can do that. Other thing to think of is your targets are going to be a lot more rich, which we will talk about when we get to the shooting phase. So a lot of your movement is going to be incredibly important for getting everything set up. Lastly, there's reinforcements. Now, you can't just take a unit and put it in reserve in your normal games, but a lot of units, like Assault Marines, like the Lictors, like things that used to be able to deep strike or infiltrate mostly, Gene Stealers don't have it, they all now have a rule. They all call it something different, but essentially they all work exactly the same. And that is at the end of any of your movement phases, you can place them on the table more than 9 inches away from any enemy. No scattering, no mishaps, no rolling for reserves and having it fail. You just put them on the table at the end of any one of your movement phases, even all of them at the end of your first movement phase. They can't move, but they can still shoot, and they can even charge. Now, since they'll be more than 9 inches away, they're going to have to roll a minimum 9-inch charge, but still, it's a really cool rule that allows you to use reserves without having it just work against you and have you pay points for things that never show up, or when they do, they mishap, or they scatter somewhere that you don't need them as much. Basically, one of my pet peeves was reserves. If you ever watch my battle reports, you know that I hate them. You know I hate deep striking, and now they don't have that. They just have you choose when they come in, and they don't scatter. So I love that aspect of it. And it actually, as much as you might think, well, then it takes away some of the tactics of it, it doesn't. It actually adds more tactics because everybody is able to do this to some degree and have a lot of fun with that. Next up, we have the Psychic phase. Thankfully, they have reduced the complexity of the Psychic phase. Now, I know before the Psychic phase wasn't so much that it was complex, it was more that there was a bajillion Psychic powers that people could choose from, and then you rolled random Psychic powers, and then you rolled random warp charges, and then you rolled random to see if you could even get those warp charges off, unless you were somebody like the Librarius Conclave or the Eldar. Psychic was hard. You could bring a lot of Psychers, but you couldn't use them all. Well, now that has changed. They have simplified it, and now every Psyker has a chance to manifest their Psychic powers. They've also reduced all the Psychic powers greatly. For example, the Tyranids, in fact, most of them that I looked at, they each only have 3 Psychic powers in each of their disciplines. So the Tyranids have 3 to choose from. I've looked at the Eldar, they have 3 runes of battle, 3 runes of fate. And I haven't looked at all the rest, so I'm not exactly sure what's available to everybody, but I know they've greatly reduced the number of Psychic powers in the game. On top of that, when getting your Psychic powers, when choosing them, they say roll a d3 or choose one. And it's not like in match play, they remove the whole choosing one. You can actually always choose your Psychic powers, which is incredibly useful. Now, in order to manifest a Psychic power, they'll all have a manifestation cost. Like some of them are 5+, some of them are 6+, some of them are 7+, depending on how good they are. And in order to manifest them, you just choose your Psyker, and you have to roll 2 dice, and you have to equal or beat their cost. For example, let's assume the Hive Tyrant wanted to cast the Horror on this unit of Tactical Marines. The Horror is simply a power that targets an enemy unit within 24 inches, and they get -1 leadership and -1 to their hit rolls. That'll be shooting and in close combat as well. It's a very effective Psychic power. He has to roll 6 or higher, We roll an 11, which is great. If I rolled a double 1 or a double 6, I'd suffer Perils of the Warp. Perils of the Warp is really simple as well. You take D3 mortal wounds. What is a mortal wound? It is a wound that cannot be saved by any means necessary and which will spill over into the unit. Now, most psychers are independent, so it doesn't really matter. But if I take D3 mortal wounds and I die, then nearby units are affected as well, and the power does not actually go off. Now let's assume that I rolled a little less than that. Let's assume I rolled a 7. I still get the power off, but now we have Deny the Witch. If there is a psyker within 24 inches of the psyker manifesting the power, not within 24 inches of the unit that is being hit by the power or blessed by the power, it has to be within 24 inches of that. Now there might be individual war gear that modifies that, but the basic Deny the Witch is if you have a psyker within 24 inches, he can try to Deny the Witch. Now every psyker has a limit to how many times they can try to Deny the Witch, and that'll be in their individual profile. The Hive Tyrant, for example, can cast 2 psychic powers, and he can Deny the Witch twice. Kind of like the old Hive Tyrant having a level of 2 for his warp charges, for his mastery level. In order to Deny the Witch, the psyker simply has to roll 2 of his own dice, and he has to beat the dice that were rolled by the Hive Tyrant. So right there was an unsuccessful Deny the Witch. And so now the power goes off, and that's it. That's all there is. There is no more complexity than that. I choose another psyker and I do it. Now, most powers are restricted to being used once per psyker. In match play, that's restricted to once per psychic phase. And so you can't spam the same power, with the exception of the Smite special power, which is simply deals D3 mortal wounds to the nearest enemy unit within 18 inches, unless you manifest it on a 10+, in which it does D6 mortal wounds. That is the common power across pretty much every single psyker. Some psychers modify that to make it better or worse, but pretty much every psyker knows Smite. And that is the entirety of the psychic phase. Next up, we have the shooting phase. Lots has changed in the shooting phase. We've got 4 types of weapons now. We've got pistols, we've got rapid fire, we've got assault, and we've got heavy. All of these have their own special rules. When you have pistols, basically every model is able to fire all the weapons it's equipped with, even if it's not a monstrous creature. Like theoretically, if a Space Marine had a bolter and a missile launcher and a las cannon, he could fire all 3 of those. Now he doesn't have that. He's got a bolt gun and a bolt pistol. The exception to this is you must either fire all your pistols or you fire all your non-pistol weapons. Pistols are useful because they can actually be fired while you are engaged in close combat. So if you are locked in combat, in other words, there are enemies within an inch of you, you can actually choose in the shooting phase to fire your pistols at the unit that you are engaged with, but you can't fire any of your other weapons. So that's where pistols come in. We have to forget the fact that if you fire a rapid fire weapon, you can actually still charge. You fire a heavy weapon, you can still charge. You can actually charge something that you didn't even fire at. So now, you just have to fire at whatever the heck you want to fire at. In fact, a unit can split their attacks however they want. However, you must declare that before you fire anything. So you can't fire one bolter, be like, okay, I didn't kill that unit, so I'll fire my next bolter. Oh, I didn't kill that unit. Okay, now I'll fire my next bolter. Now you've got to declare all of them at the same time. So bolters are still rapid fire, but now it's rapid fire 1, which means they get 1 shot, but at half range, they get double the shot. So some weapons are rapid fire 2, some are rapid fire 4. It just means that they get that many shots, and then when they're at half range, they double it. So this unit right here of Space Marines, for example, has 3 bolters and a grav cannon. Grav cannons are totally different now, by the way, so they're no longer the go-to weapon for Space Marines. I think you're going to see a return of plasmas in this new edition. But putting that aside, grav cannons are heavy 4. So if they move, they get -1 to hit, but otherwise they can fire just as normal. They're strength 5, and they have, every weapon has a save modifier. Some of them are just 0, so they don't modify the save at all. But now it's no longer AP6 or AP5 or AP4, where it just straight up negates those saves. Now it's a save modifier. The grav cannon, for example, has a -3 save modifier. So if you had a 3+ save, that save becomes a 6-up save. If you had a 2-up save, it becomes a 5-up save. If you have a 4-up save, then it becomes a 7-up save, which is impossible. And bolters are strength 4 with no save modifier. So for example, if I chose this unit, which is the first thing you have to do is choose a unit that has at least 1 enemy within range of 1 of the weapons. I then choose my targets. Let's say I want to fire the 3 bolters into the termagants in front of me, but the grav cannon is really good at taking out things like the Hive Tyrant. So I want to fire at the Hive Tyrant, but that's a no-go, because the Hive Tyrant has the character special rule. And when something has the character special rule, and it has 10 or less wounds, it cannot be targeted by anybody unless it is actually the closest target. So you can protect your characters simply by having them behind. This makes up for the fact that characters no longer join units, that they're all on their own. Well, if you have anything closer to them, they cannot be shot at unless they are the closest visible unit, and they have 10, or they have more than 10 wounds. If they have more than 10 wounds, then you're free to shoot at them, no problem, because they're so big and imposing that you really don't want to. But let's assume, for example, that the Hive Tyrant is actually the closest. So then we have 3 bolters that go into the Termagants, and the grav cannon is really good at taking out monstrous creatures because it actually does normally 1 damage per wound, but if something has a 3+ save or better, it actually does D3 damage per wound, which we'll talk about in just a second. So let's show what this would happen. We got these 3 Marines. Let's assume this squad has moved. These 3 Marines are going to fire at the Termagants, and the grav cannon will fire at the Hive Tyrant. So I get 6 shots with the Marines. They have a ballistic skill of 3+. Right now, this is not being modified in any way. Even if the Termagants were in cover, this would not be modified in any way. So we just hit on 3s. That was a half-decent roll. I've got 4 hits. I then resolve the wounding. Now, the wounding works differently from 7th edition. You have to get used to the new strength and toughnesses. They don't mean what they used to mean. If the strength is equal to the toughness, you wound on a 4+. If the strength is greater than the toughness, you wound on 3+. If the strength is double the toughness, you wound on 2+. So now all of a sudden, strength 6 versus toughness 4 still only wounds on 3+. Strength 7 versus toughness 4 wounds on 3+. Strength 8 versus toughness 4, that wounds on 2s. It goes the other way as well. If your strength is lower than the toughness, you wound on 5+. But if your strength is half the toughness or lower, you wound on 6s. It is never impossible to wound your target. You could be strength 1 and they could have toughness 1,000,000 and you would still wound them on 6s. Now, bolters are still strength 4. Termagants are still toughness 3. So in this case, we're still winning on 3+, but not because that's the way it used to be done, but because the new way just happens to be the same at this strength and toughness. And we inflict 4 wounds. Now before, bolters were AP 5, they would ignore the 6-up armor save of the Termagant straight up. Now bolters have a no save modifier, so the Termagants get their 6+ save. So yay, 6+ saves actually will do something a lot of the time. I roll my saves. What I'm actually supposed to do is allocate to a model, roll it, save, allocate to another model, roll it, save, so on and so forth. But because all the Termagants have the same save, they actually have a rule for fast dice rolling where you can do it all together. So I roll them all, I make 1 save, 3 of them die. Here's the next part that you're not used to if you've played 7th edition. Which 3 die? The answer is whichever ones the Termagant owner wants to die. So I could kill this guy, I could kill this guy, and I could kill this guy. It doesn't matter. Now, the one rule though is if there are multi-wound models and one of them has already taken a wound, he has to take the rest of the wounds before anybody else goes. So you can't spread out wounds in any way. There's never a way to do that. Now, some weapons cause multiple wounds. They have a damage modifier, or they have a damage stat. Most weapons have a damage stat of 1, which means every time you fail a save, you take 1 damage. But some of them might do more. Let's say those bolters actually did 2 damage. Well, they wouldn't kill 2 Termagants per failed save, because you allocate it to a model, that model rolls their save, they fail it, and they take that much damage. It does not spill over. So when you have a weapon that does multiple wounds, or has a damage of more than 1, it's kind of wasted when you fire against single wound models. They're more meant to take out the multi-wound models. Like the grav cannon, it is now going to fire at the Hive Tyrant. Normally he hits on a 3+, but since I moved and it's a heavy weapon, he will hit on a 4+. So let's roll to see how many hits he gets. Well, he got average as well. We got 2 hits. Now his strength is 5. The Hive Tyrant's toughness is 6, so I will wound on 5s, not because of the old 7th edition, which happens to have the same number that we would be rolling, but because the toughness of the Hive Tyrant is greater than the strength of the grav cannon, but not double. So if the Hive Tyrant was toughness 7, or toughness 8, or toughness 9, that grav cannon would still wound on 5s. So let's see how many wounds we do. We roll, and we get 1 wound. Now the Hive Tyrant has a 3+ save, and the grav cannon has a -3 modifier, so that 3+ becomes a 6+. Now Hive Tyrants thankfully now have an invulnerable save. I do think invulnerable saves have been given out too much in this edition. I think they could have lowered the amount, especially the 3+ invulnerable saves that are out there. But I do like the fact that the Hive Tyrant got one because it just helps him to survive a bit more. So he gets a 5-up invuln that cannot be modified, so I will take that instead of the 6-up armor. So you don't take both, you have to take one or the other, and you can choose which one. He fails that. Now the normal damage of a grav cannon is just 1, so I would take 1 wound. But since the grav cannon has a special rule that says if it's shooting at a target that has a 3+ save or better, which the Hive Tyrant does, it actually does D3 wounds. So at this point, we would roll D3. We inflict 3 wounds on the Hive Tyrant, bringing him from 10 wounds down to 7. So even though you're going to notice that vehicles and monstrous creatures all have way more wounds now, there are a lot of multi-wound weapons out there that'll help to take them down. Crack missiles, last cannons, melta-guns, they're all either D3 or D6 damage, so they can take down vehicles and monstrous creatures really fast. Whereas bolters, while they can hurt them, will take a lot more shots in order to be able to kill something like a Hive Tyrant. So it really allows them to be brought in with lots of wounds. It means anything can kill a Land Raider, but really in the end, you're going to need the good weapons to do it well. But in a pinch, you can fire as many last guns as you want at it, and you might actually be able to take it down with it. So everything can hurt everything, which is a big deal when you consider the game has things like Imperial Knights all the way down to a Grot. And those things now can fight, and the Grot can technically hurt the Imperial Knight. Is it likely to? Of course not. But it can, and that's the point. It really makes the game feel a lot different. One more thing is grenades. Now grenades are simplified in this, in that if a unit is equipped with grenades, in the shooting phase, one model can throw a grenade instead of firing any other weapon. So even though we have the rule that a model can fire as many weapons as they're equipped with, the exception is grenades and pistols. And so in this case, one of these guys could have thrown a crack or a frag grenade. A crack grenade would actually be a good shot against the Hive Tyrant. A frag grenade would actually be a good shot against the Termagants. They've gotten rid of templates. Blasts and flamer templates are gone. Instead, most blast weapons instead do D3 shots. A large blast typically do D6 shots. Things that are torrent usually just have a longer range. And flamers and other template weapons from before typically, they all have their own thing, do D6 shots that all auto hit. So the blast ones don't auto hit. And I'll give you an example of that right now. The Whirlwind back here has its missile launcher. The one that we're equipped with right here has heavy 2D3 shots. And so what I would do first before firing it, after I've designated my target, is I would roll 2D3. In this case, a D3, if you're new to the game, is just a D6 divided by 2, rounded up. So a 6 becomes a 3 becomes a 2, because rounded down, or divided by 2, rounded up. So this is 5 total shots. I would then take my 5 dice and I would make my attacks. And I still have to roll to hit. Now, you might think this Whirlwind can fire at full ballistic skill no matter how much it's moved, but it doesn't. If it moves, it's got a heavy weapon. You have to forget the fact that vehicles before had a relentless special rule, because now you just have to put them in there with everything else. Now some vehicles will have rules against this, but most of them, if you move and fire a heavy weapon, it'll be at -1 ballistic skill. So I still have to roll to hit with them. Conversely, we have a flamer right here, which is 8 inches assault D6. Now it's assault, so it could actually have advanced and still fire it, and it auto hits, so he doesn't even have to worry about the -1 hit modifier. So if I wanted to fire this flamer at these Termagants, I would declare it, I would roll my D6, and I get 6 auto hits in this case. Now that was a pretty good roll, but still you're going to get like 3 or 4 auto hits against those guys, and we go straight to wounding them, which with a flamer, strength 4 against their toughness 3, would be on 3s, and we just dealt 4 wounds. The last thing I want to talk about for the shooting phase is how cover works. Now you may have noticed in the movement phase that I didn't talk about it, and maybe I should have, because essentially things like ruins and trees don't slow you down. Unless their datasheet says they do, most of the time there's no difficult terrain anymore, really. There are some exceptions, like the woods have the rule that if you try to charge through them, you get -2. And there are certain things like tank traps that can modify how you move through them as well if you're monsters or vehicles. But for the most part, you just move through the stuff as usual. However, if you are an infantry model and you are wholly within, by that I don't mean on or within, I should say, so the guy can just be touching it, but the whole unit has to be on it or in it, then they get a cover save. Now the cover save is just a +1 modifier to their armor. So for example, this bike would not get anything because he's a bike. But if we were to replace him with the 4 Space Marines, and assuming they're all in here, even if they're just touching it, so on or in, then they get +1 to their armor. So they actually become 2 up armor instead of 3 up. So that's a pretty significant change. Now that does not get affected in the close combat phase or the fight phase, it's only in shooting. And when it comes to big things like monsters and vehicles and bikes, they have to actually be 50% covered by it in order for it to actually affect them. So cover is going to play an important part in the game, but it's not the same as before. Now I'm kind of confused. I don't know why they didn't have cover give you a -1 ballistic skill. They have plenty of other things modifying ballistic skills, so it's not like they're afraid to do that. But why not have cover be -1 to hit? I would have liked that a lot more, because having played an entire campaign of Armageddon and Necromunda, that's how they work. And I really enjoy that mechanic, rather than it modifying your armor save. And either way, abstracting wise, it works. I just think I would have enjoyed more seeing a -1 to hit rather than a modifier to armor save. Just because I'm a Tyranid player, so most of my armor saves suck, so I don't really care about a +1 to them. For the most part, weapons are going to then negate that and not really care. But even putting that aside, I feel mechanic-wise, it would have been better for cover to give the -1 to hit. But that's not how it works. It gives a +1 armor instead against shooting. Next up is the charge phase. Now, let's assume it's a Tyranid player's turn right now. The charge sequence goes as follows. 1, you choose a unit to charge with. 2, choose your targets. 3, unfortunately, enemy resolves Overwatch. And yes, I say unfortunately, I don't like Overwatch, but it's here, so we'll deal with it. And number 4, we roll 2d6 and make our charge move. For example, these Gene Stealers want to charge these Marines, so I declare them as a target. They then Overwatch. Now, there is no limitation to how many times you Overwatch, but it does work like 7th edition where you only hit on 6s, and no modifiers to the 6 to hit can ever be made. So if the Gene Stealers had a rule where they were hard to hit and it's -1 to hit, that wouldn't matter to Overwatch. So for example, these guys will fire. So I've got my 6 shots with the bolters. They hit on 6s. We got 1 hit. Gene Stealers are toughness 4. They're strength 4, which means we wound them on 4s, and we did not wound them. The Grav Cannon would then fire 4 times, hitting on 6s. 1 hit, and he would wound on a 3 because he's strength 5 versus toughness 4, and he wounds it. And then the Gene Stealers would get their invulnerable save of a 5+, which they fail. Any one of these could die then. So I don't have to choose the closest one and have a harder time charging. I could choose the one that's furthest away. After all the Overwatch is resolved, I roll 2d6 for my charge distance. I get a 7, and that's how far I can move. Now, forget everything you know about 7th edition charging. You probably were doing it wrong anyways because it was kind of convoluted. This one is much simpler. Simply move one of these models to within an inch of one of the targets. It does not have to be closest, and it does not have to be via the closest path. But you must stay more than an inch away from any models that you did not declare charges against. I want to show you some funky stuff with this. This Gene Stealer, I'm going to move him 7 inches, and he's going to end here. I don't have to get into base contact. I do not have to use my full 7-inch move. All I have to do is end within an inch of the Space Marine that I declared the charge against. The rest of them can do whatever the heck they want, as long as they maintain coherency. I could actually go like this. I could be like, ba-ba-da. In fact, you know what? I'll show you something. I will go like this, staying an inch away from him, more than an inch away from him, so I do not engage him, and that is how I charge. They did not have to charge in. They did not have to try to get in base contact. They did not even have to try to engage the unit that they charge. They just have to make sure they stay more than an inch away from anybody that did not charge. Now let's say I did want to charge him. I could have declared a multi-charge, but he would have got to Overwatch as well. So at this point, let's say I don't do any other charges, then that's it. We just move on. Now, Overwatch, one key thing is you can Overwatch as many times as you want as long as you're not engaged in close combat. So if I try to charge with a unit, you Overwatch and you kill it, or it fails its charge, and then another unit declares a charge against it, it can Overwatch again. This is really useful because some people would take like one Gaunt, like me, I would do that because I hated Overwatch, so I'd try to eat it up whenever I could. I'd have him charge first. All these guys would be like, well, I gotta shoot him because he's gonna make that charge. They kill him maybe, or they don't, who cares, it's one Gaunt. And then the next unit could charge in without any Overwatch. Well, you can't do that anymore. You have to engage them to stop them from Overwatching. Flamers have gotten deadlier because they are Assault D6, so they get D6 auto hits. They don't care that it's 6s to hit, they auto hit. So before they were Wall of Flame D3 auto hits, now Flamers that are mostly D6 will just hit you D6 times. So they're even scarier in Overwatch than they used to be. So that is the charge phase. Let's assume that this is where we end, and we'll go straight to the fight phase. Now, in the fight phase, we go through the following sequence. 1, we choose a unit to fight with. 2, we pile in up to 3 inches. 3, we choose our targets. 4, we choose our weapons. And 5, we resolve those attacks. And then 6, we consolidate another 3 inches. Now, if you charged, you actually resolve all the charging units first. This is why charging is huge. There's no more initiative to tell you the order in your fights. You resolve all of your chargers. So if I charge with 5 units, I get to fight with all 5 of those units before my opponent even gets to think about fighting me. After all the charging units have gone, the player whose turn it is chooses a unit to fight with, and then his opponent chooses a unit to fight with, and then the player chooses a unit to fight with, and then his opponent chooses a unit to fight with, back and forth. Once one player has done all their units, the other player can finish all of theirs in whatever sequence they want. So charging is huge. Genestealers, Initiative 6 and 7th edition don't care about that anymore. If they didn't charge and somebody else charges them, they get hit first. There are some ways around this, like stratagems, which we won't talk about right now. Let's just assume that that is the case. So it's Tyrannid's turn. We choose a charging unit of Genestealers, and they get to pile in 3 inches. Pile in is weird, and you're going to have to get used to this, and you need to do it right, because it does not work like in 7th edition, and it's going to mess with your head at first. When you pile in, a model can move, if they want, up to 3 inches. They do not have to pile in. If they do so, they must end closer to the nearest visible enemy than when they started. It does not have to be an enemy to which they are engaged with. For example, this Genestealer could not pile in 3 inches this way, because the closest enemy to him is that bike. So if you spread out your guys like this, and you didn't want to engage that guy, then you're kind of screwing yourself over and you're not able to get into the fight. But I'm actually going to do a little trick here that I want to show you the implications of. This guy right here, his closest is him, so I'll just leave him where he is, because as long as he's within an inch of an enemy, I can fight him. This guy will actually stay where he is, because this guy, the closest is the bike, so I'm actually going to pile in 3 inches to the bike. I have now engaged that bike. He is now part of this fight. And that was fine because I'm in coherency and I did not end further away from the unit that was closest. This Genestealer will pile in there too. Now this bike is locked in combat. Now, there is a disadvantage to me doing this when I charge. When you charge, you can only attack guys that you charge. So these 2 guys will be wasting their attacks. They won't be able to fight against him. But maybe this is a unit that I really don't want to shoot, and I know it sucks in close combat, and so I want to engage it that way. Next, I choose my guys and I choose my targets. So these 2, because they're within an inch of him, or they're within an inch of a guy who's within an inch, so I can actually probably choose this guy too. If I charged him in the right way, I can get him within an inch of a guy who's within an inch, and these 3 can attack him. You might be thinking, wait a second, Matthew, he's closer to him than he is to him. It doesn't matter. You can be in base contact with a guy, and you don't have to fight him. You can fight somebody else that you're within an inch of a guy who's within an inch of. So you gotta just forget 7th edition 40k close combat rules. Just 100%. This is probably the biggest change of the game. Everything else changed, but this feels like the biggest part of the game that you're going to be able to manipulate, that you're going to be able to use some really cool tactics, that you're going to have to learn what those are so you can counter them and not become victim to them. So we're going to have all 3 of these Genestealers attack these Space Marines. Now Genestealers have 3 attacks each. They do not get any bonus attacks for charging. They do not get bonus attacks for being equipped with Rending Claws and Scything Talons. You don't get bonus attacks unless it specifically says you do. There are some things that give them, but in this case charging does not. Charging just gives you the advantage of fighting first. So I have 9 attacks. I can roll these all together because they're going to fire the same weapon, or use the same weapon, which I'm going to use their Rending Claws. Rending Claws, or their weapon skill, is a 3+, so I hit on 3s. That's not bad. I got exactly average. We got 6 hits. The Rending Claws are strength 4, -1 armor, 1 damage each, and that means I will wound on 4s. Now they have a special rule called rending, or if they roll a 6 to wound, that -1 save becomes a -4. So what we have here on 4 pluses, we have 2 that didn't do anything. We've got 3 saves, or 3 wounds that are at -1 armor, and we got 1 rending that's at -4 armor. Well, -4 armor to a 3+ save makes it a 7+, which makes it impossible. So 1 guy is going to die here. The other 3, the Space Marine player would then pick up. He would roll his 3+ saves. He makes 2 of them and fails 1, so 2 guys in total die. He can choose whichever ones he wants. He can choose from the back. He can choose from the front to try to get himself out of combat, and so on and so forth. In fact, if he chose these 2, he wouldn't be able to fight back with these guys. Because in order to choose a unit, they either A, have to have been charged, or B, be within an inch of an enemy. And so these guys would actually be out of combat. So you can kill guys to get out of combat, but maybe he doesn't want to get out of combat. Maybe he actually wants to fight, so we'll kill these 2 in the back. The Genestealer over here can't attack because he charged this turn, so he can only attack something he charged. So now all the charging units have gone. It's a Tyrannid player's turn, so he can choose another Tyrannid unit to fight, but I can't choose one that's already fought, so I'm done. So the Space Marine player gets to choose a unit. Well, he has 2 choices, the attack bike or these Marines. Now in this case, the Tyrannid is done, so I could do the attack bike and then I could do the Marines. But basically, let's say I did the Marines and I did really well, and they only have 1 attack each, but let's say they actually killed 2 Genestealers. Well, as a Genestealer player, I could be like, well, maybe I don't want to engage that bike. and I kill those two. Now the bike can't be chosen to actually fight. The whole video could be made, a whole video series could be made on tactics for charging, which maybe we'll do in the future. But I wanted to show this weird charge, and this is only one type of weird charge, so that you realize how different this is from the way 7th edition charging worked, because it is 100% different, and you've got to keep that in mind when you go to do it. The last phase of every turn is the morale phase. Every unit that took one or more casualties, it's not wounds, it's casualties, must take a morale test. A morale test is really simple. You simply roll a die, you add the number of casualties you took, and if it's greater than your leadership, you lose that many more guys. For example, these Marines lost 2 guys. They have a leadership of 7 when they don't have a sergeant. And so if I had rolled a 6, for example, that 6 plus 2 would be 8. We would subtract 7 leadership from them, and they would lose 1 more model. We just pluck it off. Once again, the Space Marine gets to choose. Space Marines have the rule, and they shall know no fear, which allows them to re-roll failed morale tests, but so that does help them right there. On the Tyranid side, unfortunately, I can't really show you too much morale with them, because if they're within 8 inches of a synapse creature, or a Hive Tyrant actually has 12-inch synapse, they automatically pass morale. So those Gene Stealers wouldn't have to worry about it. Now this is at the end of the turn, so it adds up casualties from shooting and from close combat. So these Gene Stealers lost 3 guys. Let's say that their leadership was only 6, which it's not. Let's say that they're not in Synapse, and they lost 1 guy from Overwatch and 2 guys in close combat. Well, let's roll a d6. So we roll a 5. They lost 3 guys, so that would modify this 5 up to an 8. And their leadership is, what did I say, 6? So it would be 8 minus 6, they would lose 2 more guys. These 2 would simply die, and that unit would be wiped out. So there's no more falling back, there's no more sweeping advances, there's no more being pinned, there's no more being afraid. There's simply guys running, the individual guys running away from the squad in terror. There's all sorts of rules, special rules within each army that help manipulate this, but the basic rule is simply roll a d6, add your casualties, it doesn't matter how many wounds there were, it's just number of models removed. And if it's higher than your leadership, you failed your morale, and you lose a number of full models, doesn't matter how many wounds they have, equal to whatever you failed your morale by. So it could be an Ogren group with 3 wounds each, and you lost 2 Ogrens, they only have a leadership of 6. Let's say you rolled a 5, you add the 2 that you lost, that's 7 minus 6 is 1. A full Ogren would just take off, he would run away. You get to choose which one, of course, but boy does that suck considering they're 3 wounds apiece. And that's it for morale. Last thing for this video, and then you can go and watch the second one at the link below, is talking about transports. I want to talk about transports because they've so fundamentally changed. Essentially, everybody now has assault vehicles, but they work very different. Let's say there's a unit of Marines on this transport. First off, you can actually mix and match which units are inside of there. Now, assault Marines with jump packs can't go in there, I don't think, but you could have 2 5-man squads of tactical Marines in there, and they could be different squads. As long as you stay within the capacity, and as long as entire squads are within, they can't be like partly within and partly without, you can put whatever you want in there. Now, in order to disembark, it's at the beginning of the movement phase, all of the models have to just be placed within 3 inches. There's no more access points, there's no more fire points. They can't fire while inside of a Rhino. If it's an open-top vehicle, then everybody inside can fire, following all the rules of the Rhino itself. For example, if the Rhino was locked in combat, they could only fire pistols. If the Rhino fell back, they couldn't fire at all. If the Rhino moved, their heavy weapons would be -1. If the Rhino advanced, their assault weapons would be -1, so on and so forth. So disembarking is simply placing your entire unit within 3 inches. Anyone that you can't place are just destroyed, and then they can move. And they could charge, they could shoot, whatever. And the Rhino could even move, and then charge. That's right, the Rhino could charge. Think of it like a tank shock, just so you don't like pop a vein in your forehead. And that's all there is to it. To embark on a vehicle, all you have to do is move the entire squad. If they all end within 3 inches of the vehicle, boom, they are embarked. It's as simple as that. No more complicated transports, no more useless Rhinos that can't do anything except transport shooters. Now they can actually transport close combat guys, because in your first turn, you go up 12 inches plus its advance, and then the next turn you're able to get the guys out 3 inches away, move them, and charge. So they'll actually be really useful for charging units, and obviously they'll also be useful for shooting units as well. One word of warning though, if you are inside of a vehicle when it is destroyed, first thing you do is you disembark, then you remove the Rhino, then you roll a die for every single model inside the vehicle. And if you roll any ones, a model is simply removed. It is dead. It could be a tactical Marine. It could be a Terminator, and it will just straight up die. And that's all there is to it. So you got to be very careful about staying inside of transports too long. Obviously, Land Raiders will be more hardy, but can you imagine if a Land Raider got destroyed with a full unit of Terminators and you rolled a couple ones? They're just gone. There's no saves, there's no feel no pains, there's no invulns. They are just removed from play. So that is the downfall of a transport, but overall, I think they've received a mighty buff in this game. That's it for this video. I hope that gave you a good overview of how the game works. I know that there's no way that a 30 to 40 minute video is going to really show you how the game works, so we have a couple of battle reports for you today. So there's 3 more videos for you to watch today, assuming you haven't watched the battle reports. They're all in the link below. First, for our Vault members, is a second part to this review where I'm going to go around and interview all of our various employees and guests who are playing right now and talk to them about what they love and hate about the new 8th edition and what they've experienced so far with it. And then the other 2 videos are 2 battle reports, one between Dave and myself. Chaos vs. Tyranid is the old grudge match. Can Dave finally beat me now that we've got 8th edition to help him out? And then the next game, which will be in the MiniWarGaming Vault, is Grey Knights versus Necrons. Now, if you're not a Vault member, now is a great time to become one. All you have to do is click the links to one of the Vault videos. You can get a free 7-day trial and get access to all of our Vault content during that 7 days. The Vault is what helps us to actually make these videos. YouTube revenue, it pays the bills to lease the building we're in. But the Vault pays our employees, pays for our terrain and models, pays for all of our other expenses. So our Vault members are what allow us to stay in business. On top of that, over the next 2 weeks at least, we're going to be putting out double, triple, I think, the number of videos that we normally put out. So if there's a time to get a 7-day free trial, it is now, because for the next 7 days, you're going to get a ton of content. And if after that, you still don't think you want to be a Vault member, well, you can cancel. No obligation. You won't get charged. Even if you forget to cancel and you didn't want to have it and you get charged, as a full 30-day money-back guarantee. I don't want your money unless you want to be a Vault member. So that we're not going to try to give you these huge gym-like contracts where it's like, in order for you to cancel your gym membership, you have to sign this thing, fax it, and then put a piece of your blood in this envelope and send it off to some other place. And all of this 90 days before you actually want to cancel. Trust me, I've actually gone through most of those things trying to cancel a gym membership before. We're not like that. You don't want to be a Vault member. We don't want your money, but we think you're going to want to be a Vault member. So go check it out. Click the links in the video description below to go watch the rest of it, and stay tuned for more 8th edition 40k content.